Okay, good afternoon. We are the Ways and Means Committee, and we are going to take up this afternoon H-127, an act relating to sports wagering. First up will be Representative Byron, the reporter of the bill.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, committee. Good to see everyone. Good to be up on this floor. Don't get up here very often these days. So yes, H-127, act relating to sports wagering. In short, because you're going to be touching on subject matter outside of primarily our policy conversations, but we took a very substantial amount of time in the Committee of Government Operations and Military Affairs on this subject matter. The content was, for the most part, constructed from the 12, I believe, meetings that the Sports Betting Study Committee conducted over the fall, and that was the structure of the bill. The committee then proceeded to do diligent work building out broader and more robust prevention, treatment, and recovery provisions, as well as looking at increasing the percentage of the revenue to the state that would be allocated to the Department of Mental Health to operate these. So in short, that's where we are with this. The committee supported it 9-3 and is very proud of our work to this point.
Any questions?
feel like we should make it more.
Yeah, we can make it work harder for sure.
Representative Brannigan.
So you took no action on any of the fiscal things, no research on any of that in that area?
We touched on it lightly, knowing that you folks here in Ways and Means would do a deeper dive into that conversation given. Yes. The study committee itself did a lot of work on that to build the structure. But when it came to the House committee, we put some actions and provisions and statute, suggested language in place. But we touched it, but we didn't go too deep into it. We really focused more on the structure and function.
Thank you.
Representative Demerol.
Thank you, Representative Byron. Did in-house government operations and military affairs, did the committee at all discuss this issue around revenue to the state and what model might work best, or did you just sort of go with what the study committee had worked on there?
More or less the latter. Yes. I mean, we did discuss it. It did come up in committee. We noodled on it a little bit, but did not change much of the structure, given that was something we knew you folks were going to look at deeper.
Oh. Okay, thank you.
Representative Taylor.
One of my concerns about gambling is that one is mathematically destined to lose over time. That's kind of the nature of the game. And I understand that with roulette, because you have 38 slots and you get paid 36-1 if you win. Mm-hmm. So the house gets the extra amount. Do you know how that works with sports betting?
So
do you understand what I mean?
I believe I understand your question. So the operators work within a structure to set the lines and set the various sort of point spreads or whatnot on any given event. So there is actually a lot of structure behind that within the operators themselves. So it's not like directly coordinated, but they all act within sort of the same calculation structures. So there is kind of a uniform point spread structure within your flagship companies that we would consider contracting to or offering licenses.
So they set the odds for the race?
Yeah, very much like Las Vegas sets their odds for their sports books. This is just essentially that same applied function to platform gaming.
Okay, so they must set the odds such that they'll make a profit even if over time with those odds.
Well, the odds themselves are based on the outcomes or perceived outcomes or anticipated outcomes of the game that's being focused on by the wagerer and the operators. So that's why odds exist, right? Or like more point spreads.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have difficulty with it because I think of odds as being set kind of competitively. Somebody says, I'll offer you 4-1. Somebody else says, I'll offer you 3-1. And a person decides which they want.
I know exactly what you're asking. Yep. I would actually maybe defer to when you have testimony from the operators to speak that more in depth. I could explain it to you, but I was also put on a clock. And I want to be respectful of that clock, and they can also speak to it more proficiently than I could.
Okay. Oh, we can just do it offline.
Representative Anthony.
Thank you. Representative Byron, was there, just to follow up on Kurt's question, many gaming oversight regimes insist on a minimum payout, but I saw no reference to any of that.
Like a minimum wager or a minimum
Yeah.
payout?
No payout, so that essentially what the house takes is limited. And what the participant.
I think I know what you're talking about. That's, I mean, what I've seen you describing is, I have not seen that in these conversations here. I think that's a little bit more prone to card games when you're dealing with the house where the outcome is.
It may be inappropriate in this country.
Yeah, so like, I think what you're speaking to is more common in table poker,
Yeah.
a casino format, because the casino's not actually playing, they're just the dealer.
Yeah.
So they take a portion of each pot. That's called the rake.
Yeah.
That does not exist within this.
Okay. The other place I was going is the testimony we heard recently and embedded in the statute is a sort of ambiguous entertainment of competition in the sense that there's a minimum of 1 and a maximum of 6 bidders. Were you folks at Government Ops, did you think about narrowing those parameters to ensure some competitiveness in the bidding?
So yes, we did. And that was also something the study committee talked to at length. So that is the no less than 2, no more than 6. And so what that does is that allows the Department of Liquor and Lottery, as they take the bids, to sort of see what the operators are offering to the state as far as like a structure within the tax piece. And so we figured, or the concept is that we don't want a saturated market with more than 6, but we also don't want an isolated market with just 1. So we left that sort of like floating license number in between the 2 and the 6.
But you were happy with a duopoly, twosome.
I mean, if that's what makes the most sense for the revenues of the state, you'll see some information based on different models at some point.
Yeah.
That'll speak to that more clearly.
Preliminarily done that, but there's no anticipating what a twosome will do in a competitive environment as opposed to a foursome.
Correct.
That's a speculation.
No, totally.
Yeah.
And I completely understand what you're saying. And we talked to this like at length. And again, this is where the bill is residing in your committee. This is a conversation for you folks to have.
Thank you.
Representative Andrews.
Thanks for coming today. I've been thinking a lot about the problem gambling fund, and I think I'm like really happy that we're doing that and that it'll be more appropriately funded moving forward. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about is not only do we need to provide services to people who have problems with gambling, but maybe that we also need to expend some of that money communicating that service is available. It sounds like maybe that, or to my knowledge, that hasn't happened. Did the committee talk about that at all?
Yes. So what we're trying to do right now within this structure is we do have an investment in problem gambling through the lottery. It is a very underutilized resource. We subcontract to the Howard Center, so it is not in-house for the state. This would change that. We would bundle all of these operations within one group within the Department of Mental Health. And then there is provisions in the bill that speaks about banners and pop-ups about the amount of time you're on the device and other aspects of engagement with the player about time used, limitations, a lot of different language and protocols on how much money you can put in. And a lot of this is self-administered, right? You're sort of self-regulating yourself, but there's also stop gaps to like unregulating yourself. Yes.
May I? Sure. I think the thing I was trying to drive at more was like, can we compel the Department of Mental Health to do outreach within our community? Like if you have problem gambling, we're here to help. And have you thought about that?
As far as sort of like directed community outreach, most of what we spoke to was the engagement through the device itself, because that's the point of contact. I think that's a worthy conversation to have with DMH as we continue this.
Thank you.
Representative Sim.
Just speaking on that a little bit more, would love to maybe hear a little bit how your committee may have wrestled with this sort of dual goal of balancing responsible gaming and also maximizing revenue to the state, and what your sense might be about, in future years, what we might see in terms of the total number of folks participating in the system and the percentage of folks that are struggling with the problem.
So the way we structured the 5% was based on sort of like the volume of dollars coming into the state, with a floor at 250,000 the first year, as it on ramps 500,000 as the floor. But that 5% is based on the amount of dollars in. So the thought was, once we exceed that sort of like 5% to the floor at 500, the more people play, the more exposure to the risk of problem gaming. So that 5% would continue to build up the fund, provide more resources. Is that answering your question?
Well, I guess my question is, I guess assuming that you pass the bill, would love to hear a sense of whether we can launch this new market in a way that doesn't create a problem for Vermonters than there is now.
What I would say now is the market's already launched. They're just on like shadyoffshorebookie.com. And so we want to like help those people operate within like a license structure that the state has oversight over.
And then over time, with the additional supports, we'll see more supports for Vermonters, not less.
Like I said, like we doubled the floor and then we doubled the percentage. So we believe what we brought to you is a very robust way of making sure that the monetary supports would exist based on how much action is happening within the gaming.
Anything else? Thank you, Representative Byron.
Thank you, committee. Thank you, Vice Chair. And if anybody wants to talk, you know where to find me.
Next is Patrick Titterton, Fiscal Analyst, JFO. And he has two documents on your own screen, and it's sports wagering revenue analysis. Is that right, Patrick?
That's right. I know I have until about 2:00 before we shift gears. So just while I log in, I'll kind of outline what I'm hoping to do. So we're going to start with the presentation I have posted to the committee's website. And really what that is sort of an overview background on how our office kind of is approaching estimating these revenues and sort of how different market structures can affect sort of what we're seeing other states experience, because there is a variety of market structures in other states. We can talk a little bit about how those are different. And I guess as I go along, the presentation is rather general with some direct tiebacks to H127. So if there's any point where you recognize something and you want to ask a question specific to this bill, we can tie it directly in as we go. But if we're able to get through all that by 2, we can go right to the fiscal note and we'll just dig right in specific to this bill. So I understand you are sharing screens in this committee now?
Yes.
The rules have changed.
The rules have changed? Well, then let me,
Well, does that work when we got other people on the?
Yeah, for him.
Since he's.
Yeah.
is that popping up? Yes, okay.
We're doing, I
Fifty.
think it's happening both ways. If we could see you, we want to see the screen at the same time.
Okay. Make it difficult for the people watching on YouTube, right?
Whatever works.
Okay, so just to start out real quick, there's going to be some terminology throughout this slide or this presentation that I think it's just good to establish, everyone's on the same page and understanding all the terminology right off the bat. The first term is called the handle. And so this is the amount rate wagered over a given period. As we go through this, everything will be kind of presented in annual terms. So the annual handle here is going to be basically if 1,000 people let me do something so it's not too hard to do mental math. 10 people make $10 bets, then the handle in that instance is $100, right? And then so from that, the revenue is going to be the amount of money retained by the operator from that $100 that's wagered after they've paid out all of the winning bets. And we're not getting quite into what the revenue share is applied to. I know you've discussed that a little bit. This is before any kind of adjustments are made, which would get you to that adjusted gross revenue. And the third term is called a hold, which is the percentage of a handle that's retained by the operator after all the winning bets are paid out. And I have the next slide is sort of a visual sort of breakdown of how this flows, just so we can all see how that looks. So suppose 100 people make $100 people make $100 bets. And 50% pick one team, 50% pick another team. So each team has about 5,000 worth of bets on it. The wagers between two teams that are considered equally likely to win. And the payout for both is set at minus 110. And essentially what that means is that if you bet $110, your expected payout would be $100. So if it's a $100 bet, your winnings would be about $91 in proceeds. And I'll get into a little bit what I mean by that. So the handle in this instance is that $10,000 figure. 50 of the 100 bets are winners, and the proceeds on those 50 bets come out to approximately $4,500. So that's the winnings that the books are going to be paying out. But in addition to that, the books would also give back to the bet wagerer the amount of their bet. So really, if it's $91 in proceeds, you're getting your initial $100 bet plus the $91 in proceeds back. So the total amount that's paid out on this particular bet or this event would be approximately $9,500, which leaves you with a revenue of $455 on this event. And if we take that as a percentage of the handle, that's where you get to that 4.55%. So that's what the handle represents. And I'll pause there.
Representative Beck.
Can you help me understand how negative 110 turns a $100 winning a bet into something that makes $91?
Sure.
How does that work?
Well, so really what that is, so $91 is if I take $100 and divide by 110, right? So they're kind of often presented in two different ways. Minus
okay.
one, so when you see a negative number,
Yeah.
Generally that means that your payout's going to be your proceeds are going to be a little bit less than what your actual wager amount was. But if you see a positive number, like let's say it was plus 110, if you wager $100, you would be expected to have $110 in proceeds. So they present them in both ways.
There it is.
See.
And I guess using this example, if this was like an even money bet, if you bet $100, you get $100 in proceeds. In this instance, where every single, like it's evenly split between the two teams, once 50% of that's paid out, the sportsbook hasn't made any money off of that. So they will often present lines like this where it might be a pick 'em, like even match, but the payout might not be at 100% because they need to make sure that they're protecting their book, right, to remain solvent and all that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, so, Patrick, just trying to understand the difference in the revenue and the hold. Is the hold always expressed as a percentage and the revenue is a dollar figure? Is that right?
It's a good way of thinking of it, yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So if we're good, those are just the three key terms. The next thing to think about is what factors into what you can expect for revenue. We've seen in other states, the maturity of the market is very key. Typically over the first 2 or 3 years, we see a ramp up period with year one revenues being significantly lower than year two, and then, eventually at some point sort of plateauing. And so, maturity of the market's key. How the market is, the regulatory of the structure of the market is also very important. How many operators are in the state? Some states are very limited in the number of operators they use. Some are, it's essentially an open market where you have many, many operators. Are they public or private? There are a few states that run their own sports books, sort of not actually using an operator to do that for them. Operators competitive, some of this comes down to, we were just talking about the -110. And one thing that can sometimes be a little indicative of how competitive lines from a sports book can be is how high the hold percentage is. Because if you see regularly a very high hold percentage, it could mean that they're setting lines that are, maybe not necessarily totally reflective of the risk that you're placing by making your bet. And then access is another really key point. I know in H127, we're talking about mobile access on your phone, but there are other states where you have to be in a casino. In Arkansas, until recently, you had to actually go to one of their riverboat casinos to place a sports bet. So mobile or retail, I think, is sort of the terminology that's used around that. Mobile meaning access through your phone, retail meaning you have to be in a physical location. I guess actually another example is in Washington, D.C., you have to actually be at some sporting arenas to place the bets, like physically on site there. And then sort of the last bullet here has to do with the tax rate or revenue share and what that gets set at. I know you talked about this a little bit with Tucker, I believe it was yesterday. I think he explained it well in that they function essentially the same, but the tax rate would be something that you're writing into statute, and the revenue share is the result of this competitive bidding process that DLL would be going through.
And we are able to set a minimum or maximum revenue share and then have it be negotiated from there even. So it's not even either or necessarily, right? No,
and I think Tucker used this example, but New York had their statutory minimum rate set at 10% or 10 or 11%. But when they actually came to the bidding process, the governor at the time said that they weren't going to be accepting any bids that were under a 50% revenue share. There's nothing stopping you from doing that.
Yeah.
A question, you used the word line. What does that mean?
Well, so I think in that instance, what I think I meant to be referring to was sort of the odds or that -110 that I was referring to. So you can hear that as like odds or a line. And it refers to, it indicates a couple things. It indicates sort of what your winnings could be if you win. And it also maybe gives you a sense of the risk involved in it. So if you see a negative number that's, negative 2,000, meaning that you'd have to bet a lot to get a little bit amount of money, that means that it's probably relatively a safe bet. It's much more likely to win than not. If you see something that's plus 2,000, meaning a small bet would get you a big payout, odds are that that's a bet that's less likely to win.
Okay.
Okay. So going back to that first point, just to illustrate how the maturity of the market plays a role. So the per capita handle, remember that's the total value of bets placed in the market. We have the different states sort of bracketed into sort of different classifications, I guess we'll say, of how we consider their market to be structured. But you can see here that in year one and going into year two for all of these states, you're seeing per capita handles increase. Just sort of highlighting that, it does take a little bit of time for the market to sort of mature and get going. But it does, we've seen in every case shown here that it does increase from year 1 to year 2. So if there are any questions here, we can keep going. The next bullet point from that previous slide had to do with what the legal and regulatory structure are. There's a bunch of different formats that other states use. The number of operators and competition that are provided by those sports books is important. You know, how many and how competitive are they? Many states offer many operators to take bets, or they'll allow just a limited number of bets, but have some type of framework to make sure that those operators are still, you know, they're requiring them to offer competitive odds or lines.
And the bill as drafted and as voted out of GovOps, how would you, that sort of 2 to 6 range, how would you put that into this framework you have here?
Yeah, so I have a bit of a, this framework was initially devised by Graham Campbell, but I have a little further on sort of how it's sort of a quadrant view, and it breaks it down by high or low tax rate and then by more or less competitive market. And in this instance, given the restrictions on the number of operators that we're talking about, and presumably as it's written, because it's a revenue share, a high tax rate, because that's typically we see revenue shares coming out on the high end in other states. This would fall into the more competitive high tax rate kind of category. And you'll see both in this and the fiscal note, that's what we've based our revenue projections on, is that sort of model.
Yeah.
I mean, GovOps is between 2 and 6. How many operators are there in the US? Is it in the dozens? I mean, I've only heard of a couple, but I don't.
Yeah, so I don't have the specific number in front of me right now, but I want to say in states like Michigan and New Jersey, where they do allow many operators to operate, I think the last number I may have seen, and I want to double check this and I'll get back to you on that, was maybe 18 different sports books.
Okay.
But let me make a note of that and I'll send you, because I can, you know, it's easy for the ones that are state controlled, like I think Washington and Montana are examples of that. So they only have one, but it's the state book, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there are, you know, in states that have sort of open markets, there can be a lot.
Okay. All right.
And then again, going back to that point of access, you know, there are states like North Dakota that have this legalized, and actually, see if I can jump back here. South Dakota, you can see that relative to other states that have sort of easier access, in South Dakota, you have to go to a physical location. You can see that their per capita handle is paltry. And right there, it's only about $7.50. Whereas in states that have, you know, mobile access or much easier access, you're seeing much higher per capita handles. So access to the market is a key driver in this instance.
In creating a more competitive market, or just in creating a higher average handle?
Well, so another thing that kind of follows that we've seen from those states that have really restricted access, you know, because, maybe not because, but we see that their hold percentages you know, I mentioned before that a relatively high hold can be indicative of maybe somewhat less competitive lines that are being offered. We do see that, you know, it can both, you know, the access being mobile can drive user engagement, but we've also seen there appears to be some correlation with limited access and operators providing less competitive lines, so less attractive lines for bettors. So I guess if we're good there, there's a pretty big variety of ways that states treat the revenue generated by sports books. You can see there's a lot that set a statutory rate, and they don't go through this negotiation process of establishing a revenue share. In this graph here, in this chart here, you actually will see a couple of examples of states that have done the revenue share. So New Hampshire is one example that they did this similar type of process that is outlined in H1 27. New York is another one. That's the example where they set their statutory minimum rate, and that was at 10%. But they actually ended up negotiating a much higher revenue share when they actually went through the bidding process. There is a little bit of variation in terms of what the state will consider the revenue to apply that rate or share to. In H1 27, I believe federal excise taxes, voided bets, and winnings paid out to wagerers are excluded or adjusted out. In state-run book shops, the state will just take the proceeds from the wagering market into their coffers. There are some states that do allow for free plays or promotional bets to be excluded from revenue.
But this bill does not do that.
This bill does not do that, correct. And I guess so we're all on the same page with the difference between tax rate and revenue share. So I think we can talk about what the JFO revenue model actually looks like. So this is getting back to your question previously. We sort of have 4 categories here that make up a matrix. There's a more competitive low tax rate, which you can see there's New Jersey, West Virginia, Iowa, Indiana. Those are some examples of states that have adopted this type of model. And I would say that, I don't know if it's the majority, but many states do operate this way, where they set the statutory tax rate typically in the I think it's around like 8 to 13, 15% range. And yeah, so that's a popular model that's been adopted by a lot of states. The more competitive high tax rate model, which as the bill currently stands is where we'd sort of bucket H127. These are typically your, it can be restricted access, like number of operators. But at the same time, they're ensuring through the regulatory process that those books are still offering competitive lines, all while establishing sort of in a lot of states, it's 50% revenue share rate. So the less competitive low tax rate, the states listed here they have a low tax rate sort of similar to what I showed previously with like the New Jersey model, but they do restrict access, which there is some correlation there with how competitive the lines are and the attractiveness to bettors to make bets, and also just their ability to get on site to make those bets. And then the last option here is the less competitive high tax rate. These are all state-run sports books where the state actually, sets all the lines and collects the proceeds from those activities directly into their coffers. So what does that look like in terms of numbers? In year 1, if we're focusing on the more competitive market with a high tax rate for revenue share, you can see and these per capita numbers are we've taken the experience of other states and sort of averaged them out and applied those per capita figures to Vermont to come up with, sort of what we consider to be likely activities from people in this state. Those hypothetical holds, those are also reflective of what we see, the typical hold being in states like that. You can see here that in the less competitive markets, those holds are a bit higher, in particular in those low tax rate, less competitive markets. So those are the restricted access places, right? And so, if we're assuming a 50% revenue share, which I believe DLL is sort of stated as their goal here, in year 1, we're estimating about $4.8 million in revenue. And if we jump down to year 2, this is getting back to the maturity of the market playing an important role. we'd be expecting about $10.6 million in revenue. And when we get to the fiscal note, we can talk more about how this affects things like the problem gambling fund, and things like that. But that is sort of where we see, the current state of this bill kind of going. Now, granted, one very important factor here is what that negotiated revenue share rate ends up being. I think it's been expressed that, the department is hoping or confident that they can, get at least 20%. And this is, potentially we're talking upwards of 20%. But, in other states that we see having revenue share, they're generally coming in around that 50% rate.
One of the things that we learned during some of the testimony we took on the cannabis market is that it eventually levels off at some point. So do we have a read on when and if this market would also level off, like year 5, year 10?
So I don't have a specific year. I think it varies a bit from state to state. But yes, generally speaking, after a few years of activity, we have noticed that, the revenues seem to sort of level off. And, if you think about it, when you talk about something like a sales tax, as the price of a can of Coke goes up, so does the amount of tax you collect on that can. In this instance, $100 bet's always going to be $100 bet. So it's really, I guess in a way it might come down to sort of disposable income and how that grows for people. So.
But for the state that operates its own through the Department of Liquor or whatever agency or division, how reliable are what kind of confidence do you have in the statistics from the other states, which I guess are deriving that from submissions from operators, that data?
How confident am I in the revenue data that's, I'm confident because, this is widely sort of reported data from every state. There's actually many different sources you can go to that all kind of report the same information. I have no reason to question any of the data available in terms of revenue handle and hold percentages that we've based the estimates on. One thing I will say that we did have to do is that many sports books opened up operators sort of right in the meat of the coronavirus pandemic. And essentially during that time, all sporting events were shut down. So how do you measure that? So how do you measure their, monthly revenue during those months? So if it was normal times. So we did have to make some sort of projections and assumptions to what this might have looked like based on what we saw from other states and that their own trajectory, and sort of backfill that information. So it is a kind of a quirk that a lot of these sports books did come, or states did come online sort of during this period when there was nothing to bet on.
Carolyn.
Where would the state of Nevada fit in these charts? I don't see them listed. And yet, at least from the outside, it looks like they're hugely successful. It must be a pretty mature market, phrase you used. Where are they?
So we actually excluded Nevada intentionally, because sports wagering has been legal in Nevada for a very long time. It's sort of an outlier in that I guess the federal outlaw didn't apply to it in some way. So they've been operating for a very long time. So you're correct, they're very mature because they've been online for such a long time. I think I actually have the date in the previous slide. Yeah, so it's been legal in Nevada, if you see the note here at the bottom, since 1949.
I don't see the note. What?
This is back on the slide about maturity of the sports betting market.
Slide 5.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, yes, I missed that.
And so the focus of our estimates are really trying to dig into this sort of ramp up period. And we go out to years 1 and 2 and three is a consideration, but in some cases, we're actually greatly reducing our sample size because a lot of states haven't been operational for 3 years. And also, the further out you go, it's difficult the further out you go to forecast something accurately.
Are there any other states like Nevada that have been, operating since 1950 or so?
No, so really every other state came online or has had the ability to establish their own markets since, Tucker would know this off the top of his head, but the Supreme Court decision in the 2010s or somewhere in there. So no, in the 2010s, somewhere between like 2010 and 2015 or something like that. I forget the actual date. So yeah,
So your next slide on fees.
Yes.
I find the idea of there's one fee that's divided amongst multiple payers of the fee to be very peculiar. And so I'm curious if any other states follow that same strange construct.
So everything
I would assume that a fee covers the cost of a service. I would assume that more people needing the service would necessitate more fees.
I think your intuition's right there. I'm not.
You could say that every day.
I'm not aware of any specific states that have structured it this way. I don't want to say that it doesn't exist because I'm not positive. But I think the thinking behind having it sort of split evenly to just ensure that you have this amount that DLO is projecting that they'll need. That was you're removing sort of the risk of if you set $100,000 fee annually and you only get 2 operators, well, DLO is saying they need about 550,000. Where's the difference coming from? So I think that was sort of the thought process behind that mechanism. But there are obviously a lot of other structures that states use, and I might ask Tucker if any of them have had difficulty actually raising the fees that they need. I know that he has had time to look into some of that.
And then if we could go to slide 13, that would be great.
Sure. So I think we've covered this first point. Vermont doesn't have a history of casinos, nor are there any casinos in existence. So you're probably not going to be restricting access. Mobile access is likely going to be your avenue here. Too many operators in Vermont could be challenging for firms. I think one of the mechanisms that the study committee looked at and that have been discussed in the past are if you have 15 operators in the state and you're trying to pursue some kind of revenue share, they might not be willing to hit that 50% mark because it's just not worth it to them. So it's unlikely you're going to have, like I said, sort of that high tax rate kind of system with a lot of operators in the state. Just Vermont's a small market. There's not a ton of people living here compared to other states. And the number of operators, while correlated with having, relatively competitive lines or, competitive market for wagerers, it's not always the case that the more that you have, the more competitive it's going to be. We saw, again, hold percentage being one indicator that New Hampshire, although they have one or two, sorry if I'm forgetting the right one or two operators, they appear to have a very competitive market through their system. So it's not a one-to-one correlation, but the more that you let in, the more competitive it is. Although I do know one of the reasons the study committee wanted to have at least 2 was to sort of have some sort of natural competition that way. But in capping it at 6, the study committee's thought process there was, we're a small state. We're probably not going to be able to support 18 different sports books here. And, like I said, what the negotiated revenue share rate actually ends up being is going to be pretty critical in terms of what the actual revenue that comes in is going to be.
It's kind of the $550,000 fee that we're talking, because that's an annual fee, right?
That's annual.
Annual, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what DLO is projecting their, ongoing every year cost to be. So that would have to be annual. And I think the estimate I was given that covers a finance director, department lead, consultant, and then ADS support and, incidentals.
And I think they're gonna give some thought to if the idea that perhaps their costs might increase slightly if they have more people.
Right, so that's another thing to think about if their costs are going up, and they have this flat fee that is irrespective of how many operators they have to deal with. That might be something that you would have to then revisit in the future.
Thank you so much. And we're gonna have you back soon to take us through the fiscal note.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Appreciate it. So, we have 4 more witnesses. 1 hour. 2 of those witnesses are folks who run these programs at the state level, so the equivalent of Commissioner Knight in other states. And then we have 2 representatives from operators. And so Mr. Gugas, how terribly did I butcher your name there? Welcome.
No, that was actually right. That was right on.
All right.
Hi, I'm Representative Kornheiser. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate you being here with us.
Absolutely.
So we would just really love to hear a little bit about your experience, what's working, what you might do differently next time, particularly from the revenue perspective, as that is our jurisdiction over here.
Sure. If you want, I can kind of give you a little background on how we got here to New York, from New York,
Yeah.
and then kind of go into some revenue numbers, if that helps.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And we only have 15 minutes, so
That's fine. I'll be
great.
quick.
Thank you. So appreciate you being here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the legislation was originally approved in 2013 when we authorized casinos in New York. From there, obviously, we needed the repealing of PASPA, which was repealed in 2018, which I think you guys mentioned earlier. So we opened our first sports book in the retail in 2019, in July of 2019. From there, mobile betting was authorized in the 2021 legislation. And then we were launched obviously in January of 2022. The legislation kind of outlined that we had to have a minimum of 4 operators. They all had to pay the same tax rate, and we could authorize additional licenses if we thought it benefited the state. So how we did that is we brought through a request for application. That request for application was broken into 2 different parts, which was a technical factor scoring and a pricing factor scoring. The technical was broken into I think 7 different pieces: expertise, advertising, technical abilities, problem gaming plans, and those things. Those all totaled, I think, 75 points. And only those who reached 60 points were able to move forward to the pricing scoring. The pricing scoring was a little different. It was based on the tax rate that was provided. The RFA did outline that the tax rate, based on your preferred scenario, which was basically a minimum of 4, or if you had a bid that contained more than 4, had to be 50%. So the price was, or the pricing factor scoring was, if you did from 12.5% to 30%.
You're frozen. I don't know if you can still hear us. We'll wait a moment for your internet to find its way back. Imagine you're in Albany, which I expect to be a place with functional internet, but maybe not.
We're not the only ones.
We're not the only ones. Okay. Is it us? It's not us.
We're still, you guys are still.
Okay.
Here, he's coming back.
Oh, that's nice.
I'm sorry, did I freeze on you?
You did. Welcome back.
Our wonderful Wi-Fi communications here.
Yeah, it's funny because we live in this rural state and we think it's just us, but I imagine you're in Albany or something.
Yeah, we're in Schenectady, so
Yeah.
yeah, not just you guys, don't worry. Let's look at the pricing probably.
You were talking about the pricing, and, yeah.
Yeah, so the pricing, each operator had to fill out a matrix that we provided that basically said, with this many operators, we would take this tax percentage. With this many operators, we would have this tax percentage. And that was valued at 50%, they received a full 20 points. And then they would, if for anything above the 50% tax rate, they would receive an additional 1 point. So that kind of got us to the total scoring, where we eventually picked 9 total operators. There was a bid of 5 operators that initially won, and there was a bid of 4 that we added to that to make a total tax rate of 51% with 9 operators. So that also detailed the licensing term. So we gave anyone that offered over a 50% license or 50% tax revenue would receive a 10-year license fee. Anything below that was 5, and then anything from 30 to, or from 10 to 30 was a 3-year license fee. So that's just a quick breakdown of kind of where we went with the RFA. If you guys have any questions on that, feel free.
No, I think we're good on that. I'm curious to know sort of how the revenues have lived up to your expectations, and anything you might, sort of red flags for us as we take this on.
Sure. So as far as expectations, we really didn't project anything because it was such a new, just like most states, it was such a new thing to the state.
You didn't project anything?
We had ideas, but we didn't actually put anything forward for a projection. There was projections out there that we would take about, I think, 300 million in tax revenue in the first year or something like that.
Big state people.
The actual amount that we brought in the first year was 709 million in tax revenue in the first 365 days of operation. That was generated from $16.5 billion in bets that were made, which resulted in $1.3 billion in gross gaming revenue, which at a 51% tax rate was the $709 million in revenue. As I was listening earlier and someone asked the question about a hold percentage, it works out to about a 7.9% hold percentage based on the total number of bets that we took.
Oh, we're losing you again.
So fun to hear about that.
Yeah, everyone's welcome to move to New York and try legislating there. We can't have any questions because there's no one to talk to. Do you want to talk to each other? Is that what's happening?
Just an observation. One of the things he mentioned that triggered it interesting. He said in New York, they vary the contract durations, the renewal, depending on how lucrative it is. That's an interesting feature.
That's interesting.
Ours is fixed.
Yes.
I'm back, sorry.
It's okay.
So,
Representative Maslin has a question for you, I think.
Sure.
Nice to see you again so soon. Do you have a handle on how well you're doing competitive wise with the illegal market? On how much you've cut into that, how much is still out there?
So it's always a hard thing to quantify because the illegal market it's not like anybody's running numbers based on how much they're doing.
Understood.
But we based on the amount of revenue that was projected, I think over a 5-year term, I think the max that we were supposed to bring in was about 550. So if you take that 709 that we did make, I think we're making a pretty good dent on the illegal market. It's a tough thing to completely get rid of because there's always going to be people out there that offer kind of a credit system where you pay at the end of a week or the end of the month as opposed to paying up front with the mobile sports wagering. So it's kind of hard to quantify, but I think we're doing a pretty good job getting rid of the illegal market in New York.
Thank you.
And I imagine you probably started with a much larger illicit market than we're starting with here. I'm curious, have there been points of contention around what should have been included in revenue or shouldn't have been included in revenue for the purposes of the revenue share?
So one of the big points of contention that came from the operator side was the allowance of free play or promotional activity to be deducted from what they pay in a tax revenue. We don't allow for that deduction based on our statute and our regulations. So that has been a point of contention from the operator side. Our feelings are mixed. We deal with the hand that we're dealt from the legislature. So we don't have, really a say either way, but that has been a piece that the operators have come back to the table on many times, asking for some relief in that area.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about gambling addiction in the state? Do you have any numbers on how that might have changed or how much money's been put into that?
So the first year of operation for mobile sports wagering, we set aside 1% of total revenue to problem gaming. The commission itself, which I work for, doesn't actually do the problem gaming and addiction services. We actually have an agency in the state, OASIS, the Office of Alcohol and Substance Abuse, who we give that money to, and they do all the programs for us. So I think after the 1% in year one, I think we're giving $5 million a year to OASIS every year afterwards. So we have seen an uptick in, obviously, because of the prevalence of advertising and the problem gaming message being out there more. We have seen an uptick in those calls and in those communications. I don't have exact numbers because, like I said, it's run through a different agency, so we don't see those numbers on a day-to-day basis. But in communication with them, there has been an uptick, of course, with the additional mobile sports wagering.
And one more question. Can you just give me a feel for what the popular response has been? If I pick a random New Yorker and say, so how is gaming, sports betting worked out in New York? Would they say, God, it's been a mess? Or would they say, we've made a lot of money? Or would they say, do you have just a feel for that?
Yeah, so we actually had a hearing, I believe last month, that kind of did a sum of the first year of operations, and obviously the number of money generated has been a huge success in year one. If you ask players, I think we've offered a pretty competitive market with some substantial amount of wagering opportunities on different leagues and different sports that we allow wagers on. There's always going to be issues when there's such a high tax rate in a competitive market. But that's the issue of the operators and what they signed up for in the matrices that they put forward in the RFA. But as a whole, we really haven't received, we have about 3.8 unique usernames, 3.8 million unique usernames in New York. And I think we've received around 500 total patron complaints through us at least. So in relation to the total number of users, we really haven't received much of a negative response from the customers. Of course, there will be some instances where there's people unhappy, but based on the total numbers, we think that we're doing a pretty good job at leveling things off.
Thanks. So interesting to hear about your experience, and you've done this. We're obviously thinking about it. Do you have any words of wisdom, things that you all think you got really right that you'd recommend we consider, or lessons learned, things you definitely would do different if you were going to do it again?
Yes. So there's so much that goes into it, from change management procedures to the operator's promotional activity to the wagers that you allow betting on. So there's so much that goes into it. But, I think some of the things that we really did get right were, the offerings that we have to the customer. I think we do a pretty good job of maintaining a market that allows people to wager on things that they're interested in. But in the meantime, not offer wagers that we feel either take advantage of the public or are not clear, or leagues that we don't feel have a sustainable model of integrity monitoring. So those are some of the things that I think we do really well is make those decisions based on what we're going to allow bets to be on. The hard part is as you guys mentioned, you guys, I don't think have many casinos, if any. So we already had a kind of a structure for remitting taxes and remitting money to different places like Oasis and things like that. So setting that up on the front end for you guys will probably take some time. But it's we've been in communication with some people in the DOL to try and help them out and give them some pointers on things. And I think we've been able to give some pretty good insight based on the law that you guys put forward and some of the ideas on some of the things that we've done well. I think we've communicated that, and we're always here to help other states launch if we can.
Yeah, Scott has a question.
Do you have any idea in New York, the games like the tickets, Powerball, Mega Millions, all those kinds of things? How much tax revenue does New York get from those games?
Well, off the top of my head, I'm not too sure. So the commission is broken into a couple different pieces. I work in the gaming division, which oversees the casinos, mobile sports wagering, interactive fantasy sports. We also have a division of lottery who does run the lottery for New York, and they handle all the revenue and the operation and marketing and things like that for them. I can get you that number and send it to you. I just don't know what it is off the top of my head. We are one of the more successful lotteries in the country. So we do a substantial business in lottery. I don't even want to throw out a number because I'll probably be incorrect, but it is more than the $709 million. I can tell you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much for spending this time with us. I really, really appreciate it. And
absolutely.
do you mind if we email you with some random question that one of us thinks of after?
Feel free. You guys have my email address.
Really appreciate it.
All right. No problem.
Mr. McIntyre?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, welcome.
Thank you. I'm Charlie McIntyre. I have the privilege of being the executive director of the Hampshire Lottery, a post I've held for 13 years.
Did you say 30?
13. I'm not that old. Prior to that, I was the assistant executive director, chief legal counsel for the Massachusetts Lottery. And before that, I was head of an organized crime task force as a state senior prosecutor. For a number
We heard
of years.
about that yesterday for some reason with much pride. So I think our commissioner was bragging about you.
Some of my favorite moments in life, as you know, you probably well know, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine share a number of games, a number of products, a number of committees. So we share a close relationship with Commissioner Knight, Commissioner Collier. So happy to help any way we can. We've been launched in sports betting since 2019, December 30th. Happy to share any experiences we had. We obviously sat with the commission you folks created to do this. And I know you have questions. Happy to answer your questions you folks asked already or any you would think of in the next couple minutes.
Do you think there are aspects of your legislation that, if changed, would increase your state revenues? I won't tell anyone in the New Hampshire legislature what you said.
Certainly the law that was passed actually had not a caveat, it was an order. It essentially said we were to create the system which would be the most revenue beneficial to the state of New Hampshire. It's in the law. And so what we created was a bid process that actually sought to do just that, and tried to blend the desire for a number of operators with the maximum of revenue. Moreover, the process and the products we offer are exactly the same as you would get from a street bookmaker. And the reason for that is, like I said, my background in organized crime. I knew that we had to compete with them directly where they live and what they do. And I've talked to a number of my former colleagues in law enforcement, FBI, state police, DEA, FBI, IRS, and we have annihilated sports betting in New Hampshire and northern Massachusetts competitively because we offer a better product. You're guaranteed to get paid. No one's going to come to your house in the middle of the night to collect, all those good things. And so our original estimates were $10 million a year. In our first full year post-COVID, or at least post-COVID sports, not being around. We did 24 million in profitability. This year, we're on pace to do more than 30. And we had our most successful month last month where we profited almost 6 million in a single month, which for a state our size is pretty remarkable. And so that's been our story, and we're sticking to it.
Anyone?
I got a easy.
No,
Yeah,
no.
I'm
not
just gonna
yet. You
ask,
didn't.
what Representative Sims asked of the last, person testifying. Thanks for being with us. You know, our geographic size is the same, but you guys have about twice the number of folks living in your state than we do. Do you have any words of wisdom for us? Anything that you think you wish you had done, and anything that you think you'd wish you'd done differently?
Well, certainly, I think, like I said, we sat with your commission for a fair bit of time, and they took to heart the don't open retail. Retail is very difficult to manage, very expensive to open, and it requires a population base you don't have,
right?
Candidly. And if there had been a market for it, there would be one in Lebanon, New Hampshire right now. That'd be grabbing your citizens across the border right now, and so it's not. Mobile only is a solid way to operate, and then the question becomes, don't worry about a tax rate. Let the folks tell you what they're willing to pay versus telling them what they pay. Because if you look at the rate that a number of the operators are paying in other states, in some states it's very low. Like, for example, New York, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire are the 3 highest per capita in the US in terms of profitability to the state. And so when you're talking a 5 or 10% tax rate, that is significantly below what the market would dictate. Moreover, I don't think you're going to get 6 operators who want to do business in New Hampshire. You're probably going to get 2 or 3 because of the size. And one of the things we did in New Hampshire is we sort of took, as part of our contracts with DraftKings, we have DraftKings as our operator, took over marketing in state and with a guaranteed marketing spend. And that was done for a couple of reasons. One is we wanted to make sure that they understood this was a partnership. But second, we didn't want to be blasted with marketing in state, which if you Google any number of states, and I'll cite Colorado and Pennsylvania as noted examples, the legislators there were a little sick and tired of seeing sports betting ads as every third. It's like almost like political season. And so that got to be a bit much, and we want to avoid that at all costs.
I've actually noticed since I've started just like doing research for this bill, all of a sudden I'm getting a lot of pop-up ads. I'm getting them. It's really funny. And then I tried clicking through to like see what it was like, and I wasn't allowed to, so.
Could you just elaborate a little bit more about what that partner's marketing structure looks like for you all?
Sure. So our agreement with DraftKings is really, we own the rights to sports betting in the state. They're our contracted partner for a certain term of years, subject to renewal. And as part of marketing, we agreed as a commitment that first we would spend a minimum of $250,000 a year in marketing spend in New Hampshire on DraftKings related products. For example, we sponsor Bubba Wallace with DraftKings at the NASCAR race in Loudon Motor Speedway. We're hosting events constantly throughout the year. We run promotions, we run marketing. During the sports newscast on WMUR, you'll actually see a ticker with DraftKings running the odds and the fixtures for that night's sports betting events. And also we allow promotional dollars to be offset our revenue, but we cap it so that they have the flexibility to offer promotional dollars, but not so much as it makes it zero. Some states did not cap it, and then some months they got zero revenue back, which we find is a problem. And I'm sure you folks would find it even more of a problem.
I think we would find that a problem. If I was an operator, I would say the state is not really in the business of advertising and might not do as good a job as I would as an operator. How did you figure that one out? Because the state's not very good at advertising. Maybe your state's really good at advertising. My state's not very good at advertising.
I'd like to think we do it pretty well. Okay. Certainly. One of the things we also found is we spent a ton of money on research because during the time we were doing the bids, after the law was enacted, but before we launched, we spent a pile of money on research. And we found that the players actually gravitated towards our brand at the highest levels over any other sports betting brand. Because what we were afraid is that if you mix the two together, sports betting and the lottery would have a negative impact on the lottery, which folks think less of that. And the answer was a resounding no. The players trusted us most. And so I kind of assumed that they believed in our brand and believed in our marketing. And like I said, I think we're number 2 or 3 per capita in the nation in terms of profitability for sports betting. So I think we've done it pretty well. You know, I as I often say to my House Ways and Means Committee, proof of the pudding and the pudding, the proof's in the eating. And so the revenues have been there.
What just happened? Will you say that again?
I said the proof of the pudding is in the pudding, it's in the eating. And so if we promise yesterday at 10 and return 30, we've done pretty well.
Okay, thank you, yeah.
Our proposal permits applications by as many as 6 people, 6 potential operators. Is that number too high?
It's not, no, to receive 6 is not too high. During our bid process, we received 13. The question becomes you know, submissions 11 through 13 were not very good, candidly. And so receiving 6 in is not a bad idea. Picking 2 or 3 of your favorites is probably what you're looking to do.
Do you see seasonalized revenue based on, you know, I think NFL probably brings in more, March Madness brings in more. So January makes sense that it's a pretty high month for you because it's NFL playoffs. Do you see a seasonalization of revenue?
Oh, there's no question. So our 2 biggest periods of time are end of football and the NFL playoffs, and then March Madness, the college basketball tournaments, their league tournaments, and then obviously leading into the tournament for the Final Four. Those are the 2 biggest. There's no question. It definitely ebbs and flows.
Makes sense.
So a couple of us live on the border of New Hampshire, and wondering if you expect to see a revenue decline if Vermont opens this market.
No.
They're good market.
Yeah, it's I mean, certainly Massachusetts has more population base as well as just more people with more money driving to the border. And also our retail facilities in Seabrook and Manchester see a lot of mass players drive up to actually bet in person. That we may see an impact, but mobile from Vermont, we don't expect much.
Okay, thanks. Thanks so much for joining us. We might follow up as we sort of finish our work this week and next, but thanks. Maybe I'll drive over the border and check it out.
Let's spend some time with you folks.
Okay, take care.
Thanks.
Thanks.
There's certain things that names.
A field trip. I believe that Mr. Venter is next. Okay, I have some arrows that I'm trying to follow here. Hi.
Hello. How are you doing
Welcome.
today?
Thanks for joining us.
Great. Can you hear me all right?
Absolutely.
All right, great. I just have a testimony I wanted to read off, and I'm happy to answer any questions in the middle of or afterward.
Great, thank you.
So Chairperson Kornheiser, members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Michael Ventry, and I'm the State Government Relations Lead for the Northeast at FanDuel. FanDuel was founded in 2009, and we have since grown to serve over 17 million customers across fantasy sports, sports wagering, and other mobile gaming entertainment activities. FanDuel is the leading sports wagering operator and the largest online gaming operator in the United States. We offer online sports betting in 18 states, including New York, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and very soon in Massachusetts in a couple weeks, actually. We're proud to offer daily fantasy sports in Vermont as well for the past 5 years. I just wanted to speak today on the need for Vermont to consider the creation of a competitive sports betting marketplace, specifically with at least 4 operators. While states have taken slightly different approaches in their respective sports wagering frameworks, one thing is clear: an online marketplace with multiple qualified and experienced operators is critical to the success of the industry. In leading regulated markets across the country, nearly 90% of sports wagering activity takes place online, and that was the trending rate even before the pandemic. In order to combat and eliminate the illegal sports wagering market accessible by Vermonters, which is estimated about $121 million, a legal, regulated, and dynamic market should be created that offers quality products for your residents. A robust, competitive, legal, and regulated marketplace gives all the same conveniences and variety that the illegal market has while having the safety of regulation for consumers. Variety is what Vermonters are looking for, and we know this to be the case. Based on a presentation from GeoComply 2 weeks ago to the Government Ops and Military Committee, over 66% of the attempts in Vermont to access unsuccessfully out-of-state online legal sports books were those available in New York, which currently has 9 live operators. Conversely, in adjacent New Hampshire, which only has 1 operator, saw fewer attempts by Vermonters than states located hundreds of miles away with multiple options like New Jersey and Pennsylvania. The presentation highlighted the demand for online sports wagering in Vermont and importantly, the demand for variety in multiple products. Unfortunately, H127 would cap the number of mobile operators to Vermont to at best at 6 and at worst 2. Compared to most other states, the proposed market in Vermont would lack serious competition, leading to diminished revenue, fewer options for consumers, and continued infiltration by the illegal offshore market. More competition means not only better products and customer engagement, but it also means more local advertising dollars, licensing fees, and tax revenue for the state. Equally important, competitive pricing is a critical component of what the public policy goal to eliminate the illegal market is, which is not subject to any of the same taxation and regulatory costs that legal mobile sports wagering operators face in the United States. Better prices ensure that Vermonters will transition to the taxed and regulated market, and that's how we will beat the illegal market. We're confident that a competitive model with a minimum of 4 operators, accompanied with a reasonable statutory tax rate and reasonable application and renewal license fee, will accomplish comparable, if not better, revenue figures than the governor's forecasted in his budget. And the lottery anticipates through an RFP with a more limited size market, but more importantly, without the inherent risks of contracting with only 2 operators. Equally important, and I can't stress this enough, consumers want choices when it comes to mobile sports wagering. They have access to numerous mobile sports wagering options right now through the illegal offshore market. So it's important that Vermont provides a level of variety in a legal and regulated market in order to bring this activity to light. The analogy is true in any other market. Suppose the liquor and lottery department offered breweries like Magic Hat, Switchback, or Long Trail the opportunity to bid at a higher tax rate in exchange for less competition. With legal microbrew options just across the border and the potential for even illegal ones to pop up in the state, the largest slice of the pie offered in exchange for less competition does not account for consumer behavior and variety and demand. What if we applied a small restrictive market to Vermont's robust cannabis law? You'd stifle choice for the consumer and create a worse product. Customers would be deprived of unique offerings that variety presents. It's also important to include that a sizable portion of Vermonters' projected income from online sports betting would not be your state's excellent tourist industry. Visitors from across New England and the Northeast enjoy a variety of sports betting products right now. And if they came to Vermont and suddenly were not able to access their preferred app, they would be less inclined to creating a new profile during their stay and more inclined to wait until they return home to make a bet. Finally, I'd like to end my testimony by revisiting previous discussions about the alleged challenges imposed by licensing or contracting with multiple operators and speed to market, i.e. making sure Vermont is able to establish a legal and regulated mobile sports wagering market as quickly as possible without cutting corners on consumer protections, responsible gaming, and the due diligence process by the liquor and lottery department on operators that apply. There are turnkey model examples where either the lottery can license or contract with multiple operators, and it can be done in a safe and quick manner so Vermont can begin accepting legal sports wagers in time for the NFL season, which is a prime season for the industry. Virginia is a perfect example of a framework in a state with limited gaming history, and the lottery as the regulators for sports wagering that saw success in quickly establishing a well-regulated competitive market enjoyed by consumers. So it can be done and done quickly here in Vermont without cutting corners on the implementation of important consumer protection rules and regulations. Thanks again for the opportunity to testify. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'm curious about your comparisons to cannabis and microbrews, because I've been thinking about sort of the parallels between this and cannabis quite a bit, and sort of where it's very relevant in terms of sort of bringing illicit market online, and people's challenges around sort of morality versus harm reduction and all of that. But I think about in the context of cannabis, we were really invested in growing a Vermont market full of Vermont producers, of which there would be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and like really building the Vermont brand around that. And I'm struggling to see the parallels with the business model for sports wagering, which seems to be dominated by a few large corporations, which is perfectly fine. Like, you have the technology to do it, no judgment there. It just, competition is so incredibly different in those two contexts. And so I'm trying to see my way to the parallel that you drew for us.
I think I understand what you're saying. I think the basic point is effectively, the more operators we can get online in the state, it just offers better variety for folks. And that's,
you'd want to have like 30 operators if we would allow that. That would be good for your, if we had like 30 operators, that would be good for your business model.
In theory, more competition's better. In states where there's a higher competitive model, we do see better product for people, and consumers do seem to like it quite a bit. In states where there's less going on, Arkansas is an example, which has a high tax rate of, it's a fee of like 51%. None of the major operators are there at the moment. That's something that, it's hurting the consumer, and there's not good a product in it. Sports betting is not done well right now.
You're attributing that to a high tax rate, not to not to a low number of operators in the market. That's the part I'm trying to.
Right. My point there was just to show that having, I guess, the bigger operators there who are interested in playing, it does affect what consumers do get. We're looking for, ideally we'd want something that would attract the best operators in the market to be able to give the best product.
Okay, thanks. Representative Odie.
Thank you. I was just wondering, how do you know that consumers like having more operators in the market? What data do you have about that?
We could be happy to provide more specifics for you, but we found in states, like I said earlier, with more operators, there's more choice. The companies kind of compete against each other to offer better promos for folks, more competitive lines, and things of that matter. I think Ohio they haven't released the numbers quite yet, but from our understanding, it's going to be, massive amounts of success there, as far as number of individuals that are actually playing right now. If I'm not mistaken, the president of our company actually testified in New York a couple weeks ago. The penetration rate in Ohio right now is above New York at any point right now. And when I say penetration rate, that's the number of individuals who can place sports wagering bets and are.
Thank you. Representative Demmer.
Thank you. Couple times you used the word reasonable when referring to fees and revenue model. Just wondering what your idea of reasonable is.
Sure. I think the number that, I think would be good is about around 20%. That's in line with what Massachusetts just recently implemented. And had New Hampshire gone above more than one operator, I think it'd be around there. And the national average is about 19% right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anything else you want to? Oh, yeah, Representative Kim.
So did you have a recommendation for our bill calls for a minimum 2 operators, maximum 6? Did you have specific numbers there that you would recommend?
Yeah, our request is raise the floor up to 4.
The minimum.
Yes, Representative.
Yes.
At the moment, we just took testimony from the gentleman from New York who devised a scoring system in order to winnow some of the applicants. The current bill, as I recall, does not have any legislatively drafted guidelines for selection, only the minimum and the maximum. And I guess I'd like to hear your view on setting some sort of relatively equal playing field for the potential applicants, whether we raise the maximum number or not.
With regards to New York, that was done, I believe, through a similar RFP process. And that was one where The operator that they chose the Matrix for isn't dumped a lot of money into the state, and currently I don't even believe it may not even be in the top 3. I'd have to check the latest stats there. And we are seeing some regression in the market in New York. You can go through their week-to-week analysis of this time now to last year, and it is seeing handle going down, and that's the total number of bets compared from this time now to last year.
Well, thank you. So is there anything else you'd like to share with us? We don't have any
No.
more. Sorry. Okay.
No, I was going to say that thank you very much for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it.
Of course.
And Ms. London.
Hi. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to testify before you today. My name is Rebecca London. I'm a Senior Government Affairs Manager at DraftKings. DraftKings is a company that was founded in 2012 in Boston. And since then, we have expanded across the country to now offer mobile sports wagering in 20 states. And we have, including having been the first operator to launch in New Jersey after the repeal of PASPA in 2018. So what I'm here to talk to you about today is the importance of a statutory tax rate. I know some of the questions that you all just gave to Mike are around this issue, and you also heard from some of your neighboring states about their option to go with an RFP model. And there's nothing to say that you can't include criteria about choosing prime operators within an RFP model and also have a statutory tax rate. In addition to have the importance of consumer protections and offering responsible gaming tools that the illegal market does not offer, maximizing revenue is also a foundation of the legal sports wagering market. For your committee's reference, a majority of states, the national average, as Mike cited, is an average of 19% of tax revenue. And since New York went with an RFP model and a bid on their revenue share, Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, Kansas, and Ohio have all also legalized sports wagering and have included a statutory tax rate anywhere from 10 to 20% on mobile sports wagering. And since New Hampshire, New York is the only state that has not included a tax rate in statute. Of course, New York is unique in that it has the benefit of being the 4th largest state, a market desirable for operators to enter, and potentially willing to pay a higher revenue share than they may in other states. And that market in particular has generated significant concerns from top operators for being unsustainable. And despite its infancy, there are already signs that New York's mobile sports wagering market has ceased to grow. And there are conversations underway in the New York legislature about adjusting the tax rate. What we've seen is handle in New York has declined over 20% since the initial launch. And in the last 5 weeks, which includes the Super Bowl, handle has declined. This makes the state dependent on a high hold rate or consumer losses to retain revenue. I think it's also important to point out that New Hampshire, had they chosen more than one operator, would have been a lower revenue share in line with 21%, which is consistent with the 20% tax rate that Mike mentioned and that members of the Sports Betting Alliance, of which DraftKings and FanDuel are both members, have advocated for in the state of Vermont. It's also important to note, as the director pointed out, that while they receive a 50% revenue share, the percentage that they actually receive is lower than that for consideration of promotional play. New Hampshire, a state with twice the size of the population, had first mover advantage in the region and frankly the country, and was well positioned to receive potentially more favorable bids than had the state been slower to legalize sports wagering. your committee has talked a lot today about the importance of a competitive market, and we agree with a competitive market in the sense of having multiple operators that creates consumer choice. As Mike said, companies like ours compete against each other in the marketplace to retain the highest percentage of market share. And so we get creative on the products that we offer. You know, some operators are really well known for a certain product, such as the way that they offer golf wagers. And then another one might be more of a basketball fan's favorite app. And so that's why it's important to offer multiple operators. And so I've sent a chart to your committee, which you should all have in front of you, but I'm going to share my screen now as well. I think I have the ability to do that.
I think so too.
I'm going, okay, great. So can you all see my screen now? It is a spreadsheet chart, which is based on market projections that we feel predict what would happen if the state of Vermont were to adopt a statutory tax rate based on the performance, the real world performance in other states.
So we can see it, but it
is it small?
Tiny. It is very small.
There we go.
Is that better?
That is so much better.
Okay, excellent, great. Thank you for calling that out. So, as I said, this is these predictions are based on the real world results of New Jersey and Michigan. New Jersey being the most competitive market. I'm sorry, the most robust market in that it was the first to launch mobile sports wagering after the repeal of PASPA. So we have the most data in that state. Michigan is also a state with a number of years of data, and they were also one of the states to most quickly scale to a full mature market. And what we're seeing in new states is that they are able to reach maturity more quickly than some of the states like New Jersey that initially launched in 2018 or 2019. So what this chart shows starting here on line 32 is it takes the bid rate from New Hampshire if there had been 2 to 3 operators or 4 to 5 operators, and would have been the bid rate was 21% revenue share with 2 to 3 operators in the state, or 16% with 4 to 5 operators in the state. Based on the gross gaming revenue population in Michigan, adjusted for Vermont's population, we would expect to see these revenue numbers in year 1 based on that RFP bid. And then below that, in comparative states, at the 20% tax rate that we have recommended, you can see that in year 1, it would outperform both the 2 to 3 or 4 to 5 operators, and that growth continues through year 5 and into the 5-year total. So, and as Mike mentioned, these numbers don't reflect licensing fees or withholdings of bettors who have wagered and won in Vermont, and any additional economic benefits like marketing and advertising. So to sum this up, we feel confident that a statutory tax rate could capture the same amount or more of revenue than what's been predicted through JFO's estimates. So I'm more than happy to pause there and answer the questions that the committee has. The last thing I'll say is I apologize for not being in the room with you today. I admit that I let the weather for the next couple of days spook me, and I decided to not drive to Montpelier to be in person with you.
I'm glad we have the technology so people don't need to risk their lives just to talk to us for 10 minutes. So
yes, thank you.
Nothing to apologize for. Yeah, Scott.
Rebecca, in any of your projections or strategies here for number of operators, revenue, any of that, do you guys take into consideration things like, Vermont doesn't have a professional sports team. we have a D1 university, but they play in the smallest of conferences with the exception of hockey. Does that weigh into any of your projections at all?
So what we've seen is the take-up rate doesn't considerably change across states with those varying factors. Given that, we know that Vermonters are still passionate about their Patriots or maybe their Bills, they're still passionate about those teams, even if there's not a team necessarily in your state. What we also see is legal operators have really good relationships with the major leagues. And what we find is that it increases fan participation and fan interest in games. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship there.
Thank you.
Can you tell me more about sort of the demographics of your average player?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we find is that it tends to be higher income individuals, more educated individuals, and folks in the 30 to 60 year range.
And would you say there's a gender split there? I heard you didn't just mention gender or race.
And it does skew male.
Like by how much?
I don't know the exact numbers on that, but I can get that for you. I do know that the higher percentage of users is male. That being said, that what we've seen is that there is the highest growth rate of users is female. So more women are starting to find interest in this form of entertainment and are taking it up at a higher rate than males.
And then in that 30 to 60, that's a pretty big age range. I'd be curious to know if it's like mostly 30 to 40-year-olds or
Sure, yeah.
whatever it is across that. And then
Absolutely.
What's the racial breakout?
It skews towards white males.
Okay. So it's like middle class, middle-aged white men.
That's correct, Representative.
Great. Okay, Representative Anthony.
Several of our guests today have talked about, most of them in favor of a statutory rate. And yet I know of no state or proposal that simply used the statutory rate as a minimum and then let bidding and participants decide whether it's worth their while to participate and bid above the minimum. Is that a strategy that somehow finds a medium between the interest in state revenues and also the interest of the operators to have some kind of at least target when they decide to participate or apply to participate in Vermont?
I'm good too if you need.
That's a really great question, Representative, and I'm glad that you asked it. From an operator's perspective, we'd actually prefer to have a statutory maximum because what we see is that where the concern lies is that there may be an operator who comes in and bids an amount where other operators aren't comfortable of meeting that percentage of share. And so, for example, if you get a lower tier operator, and actually Director McIntyre mentioned this in his testimony to the study committee in the fall, if a lesser operator offers you 80% of revenue, but they're not able to fully capture the market, that's not the same as well-known household names who can capture more of the market when they are, and while they're paying a lower statutory rate, because they're able to capture more of the market, you are still acquiring more of a tax base.
Anything else you'd like to share with us? I think we've run out of questions for you.
Okay, excellent. No,
everybody did really good work that we're.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. I just really appreciate your consideration on this matter. And you all have my contact information if you do have additional questions. And you should have this sheet that I sent you. I know you all are the numbers folks, so you'll be more familiar with this sort of thing than I am. So I appreciate you having us testify today.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we are going to go to the floor. After the floor, we will be back in this room to continue working on family medical leave. Repeat, back in the room after the floor. New twist in our lives. It's going to be great. Next week, the floor is going to be at 1. So then we'll definitely come back here after the floor next week. And I'll see you then.